Welcome to Pact's new journey of communication. We are starting a Pact point of view virtual. We are meeting with our staff on Zoom and talking about adoption, race, and family, how they currently intersect with all of the current events going on in our world. We hope you find this useful, thought-provoking, and helpful to start conversations within your own family and communities. We invite you to like, share, spread the word. Pact is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to serve adopted children of color. We provide not only adoptive placement, but lifelong education support and community for adoptees and all of their families, birth first families and adoptive families, on issues of adoption and race. Be sure to check out our website, pactadopt.org, and find us on social media. Hello, everybody. Welcome to PAC's very first Zoom table talk. We just wanted to gather together as an office and a community to just kind of talk about what's going on in the world, what's going on for us at PACT, and share it with everybody that we know is connected to PACT and is also wondering how to get support for what's going on and kind of what PACT is doing and where we're thinking and what we're talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves, just first name and pronouns, and then we'll jump into it. So I'll start. My name is Katie, she, her. I'm the adoption social worker at PACT. I'm also going to have you tell me your role at PACT. Deanna.
Hi, I'm Deanna, she, her, and I am the Pact Camp director.
Malika.
Hi, I'm Malika. I'm the director of the Adoptive Parents of Color Collaborative. My pronouns are she, her, and yeah.
Welcome. Ben.
I'm Ben, I'm he, him, and I am PAC's youth coordinator.
Susan.
I'm Susan, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the adoption agency supervisor and birth/first family specialist.
And Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth, and I am the founder director of Pact.
And your pronouns?
She, her. Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. So we are currently living through a global pandemic, hurricanes, fires, heat waves, and an election, a very important election, as well as people have called it racial uprising, reckoning, all sorts of things. Just a lot going on while most of us are quarantined at home. So I wanted to bring us all together to talk about what we're seeing, what is coming up for us, maybe for those of us that work with specific groups at PACT or support people through PACT, what are you hearing? So if anybody would like to start something that hasn't come up for you in the last week. I feel like we get new stuff every day, which is also hard. But maybe something that's coming up for you that you just want to talk about. And I will pick you if somebody doesn't speak up. If you need more of a prompt as well, you can let me know.
So one of the things that's just really up for me right now is thinking about how quickly in this country we go from something that people are celebrating, like the possibility of a Black woman being the vice president, to Black men who are calling for help being shot in front of their families, and that there's not space to breathe, right? That, and literally in California, there is not space to breathe, right? Like that like our health is under attack with the pandemic, our air is under attack with the fires, our safety is under attack, and our ability to just dream and vision for something different is just constantly being pushed down. And for myself and for other families that I know, just kind of holding that steady is really, really hard, and finding space to be joyful and support our little people when, you know, they're going through their own moments of trying to address things that are coming up for them. Most children are not in school right now, and so they're experiencing their own set of loss. And it's just a lot, and it's constant. And yeah, so I'm definitely experiencing that. And I've talked to a lot of people of color, a lot of parents who are also just kind of trying to find their way in this moment.
I'll go. To piggyback off of Malika, I mean, 2020, whew, it has been a year. We've been sheltering in place since March. Right shortly after that, we had George Floyd, and here we are months later, and we're doing it again. We've all joked around how we've said it's Groundhog Day, but it is truly Groundhog's Day, and it feels like it is the same day, but getting worse. To think about those children who witnessed their father being shot 7 times, and the therapy that they're going to need, the trauma that's going to follow them. To think about our kids, all of our kids of color, how we're raising them to know how wonderful and great they are, and the world right now is telling them, you're not worthy, you're not equal, your life doesn't matter. That's been coming up in the communications I've been having. The lack of community that people are feeling right now. Pact Camp was a big source of community for a lot of our families, and I think a lot of people are realizing now more than ever, dealing with Pact once a year for their children is no longer acceptable, and they need more outside of that 1 week of camp. So I'm hopeful that people are going to find different ways, stay connected for their kids' sake to communities of color. Also, another thing that's been coming up in the conversations I've been having is the lack of resources that there are for same-race adoptees, and how they feel so different than transracial adoptees, and so take themselves out of the adoption conversation altogether because it's different but the same. Been looking for Black therapists who are adoption competent. It's really difficult. We have a lot of needs right now that are just not being met all the way around. And that's what's been coming up, not to mention all the things, the fires, the pandemic. 2020 again, whew.
Yeah, so lack of community, I see that with my adoptee group. I have a lot of new adoptees that are coming up and just like, I need this. The scary thing for me is the number of adoptees who, after George Floyd's murder and kind of the reaction from the country, then had to talk to their white adoptive parents who were like, well, you're not like them. We don't see that in you. Like, you're our kid. So I've had a massive amount of adult adoptees come to my group to say, my parents still do not see me as a person of color, and I'm 37 years old. Because they're fighting and making comments on their social media, and then their parents are like, why are you doing that? Why are you protesting? Why do you have a Black Lives Matter? Why are you going to a group for adoptees of color? They don't have community. They don't have support from their parents. And because the whole country woke up, even though this has been happening since 1600s and longer, the big lack of community is a big thing that is coming up with the adoptees of color that I support. I don't know if anybody else wanted to talk about the groups that they're supporting and what they're seeing, or if you're like, oh yes, like Deanna said, 2020 is really hard. But also, where are people finding moments of joy, or where are you seeing things that might be like something is changing, like things are different, like there are some things happening, but it's going to take time, as we know. So I don't know if anybody who hasn't spoken yet wants to share.
Yeah, I mean, I can I can speak a little bit to my clubs. Obviously, I think that the one thing that's come up a lot for them, or that's still kind of touching on the negatives, would be obviously the fires that have been coming in, and kind of, I think, for everybody who was able to build some sort of safe haven, or like some, basically we've transitioned into a new space where people, I think, were just starting to get used to whatever this new lifestyle is. And so some of my kids were having to relocate, some in Santa Cruz, some in other areas. So it affected them differently, but I know that was a constant conversation of just kind of like, how do we find another space, another safe spot, if we're basically on the run, and being concerned that the, little times that they do get to socialize are usually outside. And then if the smoke or the air quality is terrible. Just another avenue that's shut down. The positive for me, I think, would be, a lot of these kids really aren't as affected by a lot of this racial stuff, I think, in terms of what they see day to day. And I think for me, that's a real positive in the light that I do believe the next generation and all of these young folks have a real opportunity, just as my generation does, to change the narrative, to change things, to really put their imprint on this world. And, eventually everybody dies, so there is a time where all these people who have made this shit happen and have made this stuff be what we've known to be common ground today, they won't be here. And the opportunity will be for those next generations to change those things that were once set in stone. And I think that their outlook on it is very much so that is possible, whether that's ignorant or whether that's just the young, youthful pounding heart. It's positive for me because I'm willing to take that fight and to take that risk. And it's something that's large enough that you would need, a huge uprising in a sense. And I think that they have an understanding that the magnitude is there for this situation. But I think the reason that I say it's not affecting them as much is because for a lot of these kids, they're able to bring stories of unity that, I just think weren't common 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And for them, it's like almost dumbfounding for a lot of them that as adults, this is the stuff we want to stop, harp on, and be really critical of. And although I'm sure that as they grow up, they will be learning more and more of the realities of this, which may change the certain gung-ho-ness to them. But I think that it's super positive to see a room full of young people who, to them, it's really like, yo, can we get to the heart of what's going on? And, if you guys need to hear more about how I love this person or I love this person, I'm willing to share that. But my day-to-day experiences do not allow me to see how we could be in this state of, I guess, all the social injustices that we're dealing with.
And how old are the youth that you work with?
And so that'll range, but anywhere from 12 or 13 this past group to 18.
Thank you.
On the flip side, is it all right if I go, Katie?
Sure. And then we'll go to Susan.
Susan, if you want to go first, it's fine. Okay. On the flip side of what you're saying, Ben, I appreciate that because I've this week really struggled with some anger and personal guilt around this Wisconsin woman who has a white transracial parent, so the same as me, has put out this thing through the Republican Party about being, she has a very tan boy and it's a good thing for police to profile her black son. And it just makes me so angry. And then I have to think about, why am I angry as a white parent? And part of the reason I'm angry is because I don't want to see myself that way. I mean, she's wrong in so many ways. I mean, she's wrong about what she said about why Black and brown people are incarcerated, she says, for violent crimes. But in fact, the same quote unquote violent crimes do not incarcerate white kids. They incarcerate Black and brown kids. That's why. It's systemic racism. So she's just wrong about so many things. And it makes me feel so guilty for that child that's in her family who has to grow up with that, and someone who's saying that kind of stuff about him publicly and what that does to his potential for self-esteem and feeling good about things. But I also realize that it makes me have to interrogate myself. And that's the harder piece. Is it's easier to be angry with her than to be honest with myself about my own participation in white supremacy, my own participation in the ways I have fallen short on supporting my own children, and also in supporting the community and speaking out in the community of white adoptive parents, and how critical and important it is that I and others do that all the time. So that's kind of what, and I've been hearing a lot of that on the support calls I do with some parents who really are, I think, getting a wake up call in this time over this summer of, OMG, I have not done nearly enough. And they're not wrong. They haven't. We haven't. I haven't. And we have to just get over the guilt and the things that sort of allow us to wallow in that and move forward. And I think that's particularly a white thing, personally, that we do that and get caught up in our head and mind and heart, maybe, but it has to be about action, right?
Have you had white adoptive parents reach out to you regarding this woman and the comment she made, which I know was only in the last 48 hours or so?
Yeah. Yes, we have, and some of whom have articulated how much it reminds them about how important the Pact community is, how important it is to speak out against this, and to and just thinking about, one parent said to me something about, maybe we should start a fund right now for therapy for the child and her family. I mean, just the angst over that. So I appreciate that there's definitely parents who understand how horrifying that is, but I can't help but think about all the parents who don't. And, are we even close to reaching enough and to delivering a different, Adoptive Families Magazine asked me wanted to use one of my old articles, which is about raising children of color while white or something like that. And I mean, it wasn't wrong, but when we read it, Michelle Rabkin and I said, can we write something more? Because it's not nearly enough, right? I mean, we hadn't even gone far enough. And probably this one in 5 minutes isn't enough, right? It's just like, so I feel like we have to use it as inspiration instead of sort of sitting back and just feeling like sitting on our laurels, which I think it's easy to do for white people who feel a little more woke. And an offensive term, but you get my idea, I think. Yeah.
Thanks. Susan?
Yeah, the person that Beth was talking about, Abby Johnson, also is an anti-choice activist, and just so, like, in terms of my role of who I support in my role at Pact is mostly pregnant people considering all of their options, and then people who have decided to place a child for adoption and or have had a child removed by the child welfare system. And just so, first of all, like the way that COVID has increased the level of desperation of people that are already marginalized in the United States by the United States, and the circumstances under which they are trying to navigate pregnancy and their options, and what would parenting even look like in a pandemic, and resources that might have been available, homeless shelters, treatment programs, like all of these things that are just drying up. People that, might have been maybe like on the edge of maybe seeing themselves as being able to parent, now just kind of tipping over the edge to like, I don't see how this is going to be possible. Yeah, just the idea of, it's for this, for this person who says that they're, opposed to abortion, and just the whole anti-choice movement, just really the idea that people would have even fewer choices now, and the way that COVID is affecting that. And I don't know, it's just, I'm not being very articulate, but it has a real emotional impact on me when I meet and talk with people and meet them in person, to hear like none of the choices are good. None of the choices are good. And the people that I've recently been talking to who have been considering adoption or have placed a child in the last, since the pandemic started, it's just like you know, everyone is, there's some part of them that wants to parent. There's some part of them that it's not like, it's not a unilateral, like, oh, there's no part of me that wants to, or wants to be able to see myself as someone who could do this. It's just the circumstances, and the circumstances are really deliberately stacked against them. And so, yeah, so that's part of what's coming up for me. Also with this woman, Abby Johnson, just like, who let her adopt?
That part.
Like, it was an adoption professional.
Exactly.
With, you know, those of us in Pact who do placement work, we are those professionals who make decisions about who do we even consider letting into our adoption program, who do we consider doing a home study for. We do the home study. We ask them the hard questions about, like, what are their thoughts on race and adoption. And so it just, you know, someone decided this white person would be a fit, adequate parent for a Black child. And clearly they were wrong. And then also, like, I don't know if you guys know her son's situation, if he was adopted through domestic adoption or foster care. Does anyone know?
No, I tried to do some digging and I could not figure it out.
Okay. I mean, just whether or not he was adopted, whichever way his adoption happened, just knowing, like, that there are so many parents of color or white people who are carrying infants of color, where the only families they're being shown in domestic infant adoption are white families. And, you know, I'm just, part of me imagined, you know, like, you know, there might have been a moment where, like, it was okay, like, these are the only families available to you, you know, to the birth parents of her son. And, like, did they realize, like, okay, this is what she thinks about race, like, this is how she's going to be raising their child. And so, and, you know, that happens all over the US today. The Gerber baby, 2020 Gerber baby, Magnolia, is adopted by a white wealthy family not so far from here. And, you know, it's like, what we know in the adoption world is that, like, people of color are not being given the same choice as white people to place their child with a family that shares their racial identity. And then we see all the problems that stem from that for those adoptees of color. The last thing I'll just touch on is, you know, the work that I do supporting people who have had a child adopted, birth or first families. Just a lot of concerns right now about, like, am I still going to have my visits being canceled? Even questions of, like, am I allowed to hug or get close to my child? Like, you know, if I have a visit, like, I'm not part of the bubble, even though I literally created and birthed this child out of my body. Like, am I, you know, am I going to be allowed to even, like, touch them? And, you know, there's, of course, like, so many ramifications for that for people. And just, yeah, it's a really sort of, like, othering and almost dehumanizing experience to be like, you're not allowed to touch or hug your child. And that is happening for people.
Is there anybody, thank you all for sharing, and kind of, this is what's going on for me, this is what's going on for the people I work with. Is there anybody who has questions for anybody else, or, like, follow up on anything that was shared? I think, Susan, when you said, like, who let her adopt, I was like, yeah, who did? And I feel like that's what I've seen in response from adoptees of, like, this is the problem with the business of adoption, who approved this family. And then adoptees are coming out and saying, my parents never should have been approved. Like, why did this happen? So I'm starting to hear a lot. Yeah, I'm starting to hear a lot of that, of, like, I have no clue why my parents were approved, or they removed me from this family because of drugs and alcohol and placed me in another family that had the exact same problems but had the money to cover it. So a lot of that is starting to come up within my group.
You know, I've heard the two of you, Katie and Susan, also talk about the way in which we've seen advertising and discussion among professionals about how coronavirus is almost like an opportunity for there to be more adoptions, and it's a good time to adopt, and just how deeply offensive that feels to our sensibilities. I don't know if you guys want to comment about that, but um, almost promoting like, oh, here's a chance to have more kids available for adoption in the midst of a trauma. And I mean, I'll let you, if you want to talk about
Susan, did you want to go?
it.
You can go.
Yeah, I mean, it happened early on. I think we screenshot one for our families where an agency was like, this is the time, like literally on March 20th, right? So a couple days, maybe even earlier, a couple days after there was the slow trickle, and then kind of the March 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, when the White House spoke up and was like, oh, we should probably take this seriously. Uh, an agency posted on their Facebook page, like, this is the moment. These are going to be people who that are losing their jobs, losing housing, or losing whatever. So just like capitalizing on somebody else's pain and loss and lack of privilege, which kind of already does happen within adoption. Placements happen due to poverty and other inequities and a deeper systemic stuff. But yeah, there was a lot of that. And then Susan and I actually saw within our own community of potential pre-adoptive parents this excitement of like, are there going to be more babies? And then Susan and I always do our like teaching moment. And then we reframe and say to them, so our approach is not to capitalize on this. There could be, but we are going to continue to talk about all the options they have. Whereas Susan and I know that other agencies are not talking about those options. At least I would wager they're not. And they're mostly just talking about get ready to place. Look at our 25 white families. And it's COVID, so place, and you won't be able to see them until there's a vaccine. Like we don't know what is being said, but Susan and I often talk about it's probably not the best. So we've had to also do reframing within our own people who call us, and also people who are not in our program already, but are starting to call and starting to ask, am I going to have a baby faster because of COVID? I always have to reframe teaching moment. So I don't know if Susan, you wanted to add anything, or if anybody else had questions about that.
I think you said it all.
Deanna, did you have something?
I just had a moment when I watched some of Abby Johnson's video, because I'll be honest, I could not stomach watching the whole thing. I just became really grateful for the services that Pact provides for placement, because my first thought was, who in the hell placed this child with her and her husband, and how many more Abby Johnsons are out there? Mm. It just made me have a deeper appreciation again for the work that Pact does with counseling options, making expectant parents know what's available to them, and us just, adoption is hard, and I don't know that adoption is ever quote unquote right, but you guys just do a really good job of providing services for the children that are going to hopefully, benefit them in the long run, and just made me appreciate you guys more. I didn't even know that was possible, and what Pact does.
Thank you. Malika, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I think sitting here and listening to everybody, we naturally kind of flow to white adoptive parents and them and their discussion. And I'd love to bring more awareness to adoptive parents of color, who I imagine are going through their own stuff during this time. So I don't know if you could, you spoke a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little more about like, what are they talking with you about, or what is support that they need? I think their voices need to be highlighted more and not always default to like these white adoptive parents. So if you're comfortable with sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is not a moment for people of color who are parenting where they're coming to this awakening, right? Like, I think that it's a real complicated time because it feels, I've talked to a lot of families where there's a sense of deep sorrow, right? Because these are things that we've been saying for a really long time, particularly as Black families. And it's been ignored. There was a very short window of time where people were like, had their come to Jesus moment of like acknowledging white supremacy, and it has lulled some, right? And then as if it was going to go away. And even in listening to you all talk, I think, you know, the privileges that are given white adoptive families are not given to Black and brown adoptive families, right? Like, even within the same systems, right? Like we all go through the same process, but our need to, even if it's just a feeling being raised in a system of white supremacy of having to prove ourselves, is not automatically puts people of color who are thinking about parenting or who are parenting at a huge disadvantage, right? So even thinking about, should I be an adoptive parent? Sometimes people will ask that question of themselves because of the systems of inequity that exist, right? Like, should I participate in this deeply flawed system? I think that that's a legitimate question, right? Like, I think we all need to be asking ourselves that question. But then the other side of it is, what do I have to offer? What do I bring to the table that makes me able to be a good parent? How will I measure up against all of the questions, all of the process that I have to go through? All of the bureaucracy, right? When we know, if we look at every single structure that exists in our society, we know that it's stacked against us, right? Like we know that people aren't looking for us to be like the ideal parent, right? People are looking for us to remove our children. And so there's like that is kind of the footing, right, of what it's like to be in this moment. And one of the things that I'm really spending a lot of time thinking about is, what are resources that families of color need, particularly Black families, right? Like, what are, you asked Katie a minute ago or a few minutes ago, like, what are opportunities for joy? Because this like constant onslaught of like, let's talk about anti-Blackness, let's talk about white supremacy. The other side of that is being the recipients of it. And so this kind of constant negotiation of space around that is important and is necessary, but it also is like a constant reminder of like, people have to be taught not to hate you and not to hate your children, right? That actually is really hard. And so I think I'm seeing a lot of Black folks trying to spend time finding opportunities for self-care, opportunities to hold their babies really close, opportunities to really just like figure this space out. I also have talked to families who in some ways are like, you know, the conversations around white supremacy, now that it's at the surface, like there's also some space to be able to call things out in a different way, that I think is really important. And to be able to say, actually, that feels like white supremacy, or that feels incredibly racist, right? Like a year ago, many of us were in conversations with other folks around like, is it okay to even say the word white supremacy? Right. And now that is like the common, like that is a common term that people are using. And I think that's really important. But the baseline of what I'm seeing with Black adults, because we're spending some time supporting Black adults explicitly, with families of color, is just how to navigate all of the stuff, like all of the things that are kind of crashing in. And we know that Black families experience the brunt of it consistently, no matter what system we're talking about. Yeah, those are some of the kind of common themes, if that's helpful.
Yes. So we've all talked about a lot and shared a lot, so I don't know if we want to wrap this up. But before we do that, I think I'll go around and ask, maybe coming back to my question, like a moment of joy or just like a glimmer of hope, because I understand some communities, just joy is like, I can't even process thinking what that looks like. So I'm going to reverse the way we introed. I'll start with Beth. a glimmer of hope or some area of change that you've seen over the last couple of months or within this dumpster fire of 2020?
I think for me, I want, there's been moments of seeing families and parents who understand that they have to do a different level of work than maybe they originally thought they did, and that feels hopeful. It's not universal, so it's, you know, sort of like what you were talking about, Malika, it's tempered with reality, I guess. But I want to believe my own son, who's an adult, Black adult, is safe and continuously learning how to manage optimism for him in some ways, being able, that the fact that it's being talked about and videoed continuously may make him safer. And look at the cost. So it's a balance, I guess, but maybe seeing people realizing they have to move into the balance more and not just trying to not see it, or somehow hope it's going to be different this time.
Thank you. Susan.
I have two. One is seeing the families that we work with, the pre-adoptive families that we work with at Pact, just fully embrace openness and really, like, to their core, getting the importance of ongoing contact and the spirit of open adoption for their adopted children, and seeing the ways that the families that we work with are really developing really, like, lovely relationships with their children's first family, like, from the very beginning. And, like, that would not have happened, you know, it still is not happening in 2020 in the US, where, you know, people are being approved for adoption, that it's okay for them to want a closed adoption, or it's okay for them to want very minimal contact. And we know that, you know, all the research says open adoption is what's best. And just to see our families really, like, not because it'll get them a baby, but because they get it's the right thing to do, and it'll give their child wholeness, and, like, seeing them put that into practice from the very beginning gives me a lot of hope. And then for first families, just the opportunities to have support groups. And you know, this is probably a fairly new thing in adoption, maybe in the last years with social media, where, like, first parents are finding each other and supporting each other, and the strength in our community of, like, grieving and celebrating and reminding each other that it's a long road, but, like, we have each other, gives me hope.
Ben, you are muted. There you go.
I already touched on it a bit, you know, with my groups, obviously, giving me some hope, but just kind of their outlook on things and their feelings towards unity, and a sense of kind of just one within their communities. But also, I think for me on a larger scale, the reaction with sports this entire time has been pretty good, but I think that this last step was really amazing. Knowing the effect and platform that they have on younger people and just people in general. Sports brings so many people together, that I think, you know, that it's beautiful to finally see them realizing, because I think this should have been happening in larger numbers for a long, long time. And I always did wonder why, but I'm glad it's happening now. That realizing that sport, you know, is beautiful, but also can be a distraction if bigger things are getting swept under the rug. And so for them to realize that, you know, for all the joy we are bringing you, we can't do that if we don't feel American, if we don't feel safe, if we don't feel like this is our home, then there's no sense in entertaining you people. And I think that that's never worth any amount of money that they're paying you. And so that's awesome to see some of these players, big or small, stepping up. And then I think the real beautiful thing about that could be that you should shed the lights on these owners and these people who have real influence behind the scenes, real money, that, you know, although these athletes are now rich, that's a different kind of rich. And I think those are the people we really have to get involved in this fight if we want to make long lasting change and change that may happen quicker than we think, is getting those real moguls involved. And I think that this is the power play to do so, which really sheds the light on them and really makes everybody realize you're the puppeteer behind all this. And if you don't have the strings attached and we get to really see how you're moving, then you may lose a crap ton of support and you may come back to a league where people are boycotting your team. And I think that that's where we're at. We should be boycotting all this crap, even though I love sports, if we're not able to see the bigger picture, you know? So that was big for me. I'm like, yeah, that's what's up.
Thank you. Yeah, yesterday, August 26th, was the first day that Colin Kaepernick took a knee. And it's taken 4 years to now see where all the other athletic teams are, and other people who, I mean, I know they're just Twitter posts, but somebody was like, I finally recognize what some white man on Twitter was like, I finally recognize what Colin Kaepernick was doing. And that was 4 years ago. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. Malika, I know you shared, but if you have more.
One of the things that has been really joyful for me is getting to spend time supporting other families of color. And this time has allowed for more opportunities. Although it's a hard time, it also has given space for more opportunities for support. So there's more like kind of acknowledging the need that we all have to be connected at a deep level. And it's also provided opportunity to think about like what are resources that are actually needed and support particularly of Black families. And so getting time to like see what's out there and then try and think about solutions, that has been really helpful and joyful. And prior to smoke day, spending time outside.
Deanna?
Some of the things that have given me a glimmer of hope during this 2020 year is all the people in the triad that are reaching out to us for resources, both people who have been connected to us for many years or people we've never interacted with. It's nice to know that people are looking for community, for help, for resources. And also the young people who are out there fighting right now. I've stereotyped the millennials and younger as being, you know, narcissistic and, you know, just concerned about Instagram and non-important stuff. And they are out there. And that gives me hope that, you know, if change is ever going to come, it's going to start with the young people. And it makes me proud and slightly hopeful, and slightly sad at the same time that fast forward all of these years and we are still fighting for the same shit. And it takes the viral exposure of Black pain for people to actually see it and feel like it's real. So,
Yep, catch 22. I have found joy and a glimmer of hope within my group. The number of adoptees that have joined us since April when we went onto Zoom calls. It's been really powerful for me to watch 35-year-olds log in and just scan the entire screen and realize this is the most people of color they've ever been around. Raised by white parents in isolation, just locking into their racial identity, and then they're like, we get to their intro and they're just like, I'm sorry, this is my first time ever attending an adoptee group, my first time being around this many people of color, my first time meeting other Latinx adoptees, my first time meeting other adoptees from my birth country, like, and then they just keep coming back and coming back. And then as a result of that, a lot of them are searching and reunifying with birth and first family members, which I have had the privilege of watching. So it's just been like, it's just been incredible. And that's my glimmer of hope of like, I am now connecting with people in New York and Washington and Florida and all over. And I had somebody who called in from Spain for a while before they came back over to the States, and new people every single month. And it's just been really great. And that gives me hope. So thank you all for joining us, and for anybody watching for our very first Pact Zoom talk. Yeah, you can hit us up with any questions. Follow us on social media. And thank you so much. Everybody else stay online, though. I'm just going to hit stop record.